Welcome back. Our mission today is a deep dive into a really extraordinary summer in American history, 1952. We're going back chronologically to unpack the Washington Flap, sometimes called the invasion of Washington. It was this period of sustained high-level UFO sightings right over the U.S. Capitol. And for a few weeks there, it really seemed to bring the military almost to its knees.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at the history of UFOs, the summer of '52, it wasn't just some minor event. It was the absolute peak, the climax of that whole early wave of sightings.
Yeah.
UFO historian Curtis Peebles, he called it an unprecedented tidal wave of reports. And the numbers, they really tell the story.
I think people sometimes miss just how sudden this whole wave was.
They really do. Think about this. In the 4 years before 1952, the Air Force, through Project Blue Book, they had logged about 615 UFO reports total nationwide. But just during the summer of '52 alone, they got hit with over 717 new reports.
Wow.
It was this huge surge of panic and interest, and it all came to a head dramatically right over Washington, D.C. We're talking multiple nights of sustained radar and visual contacts, jet fighters scrambling, objects supposedly hitting, incredible speeds, and direct, almost panic involvement right from the White House.
That sets the stage perfectly. So let's go right to the start of the panic. It's late Saturday night, July 19th, 1952. Around, 11:40 p.m.?
Yep, 11:40 p.m.
Everything changes. An air traffic controller, Edward Nugent, at Washington National Airport, spots 7 really unusual blips on his radar, an area that should have been clear.
Exactly. And this wasn't like weather interference or stray noise. Nugent immediately called his supervisor, Harry Barnes. And what they confirmed together, well, it was genuinely chilling.
What did they see?
The blips were solid, they were distinct returns, and they were showing movement that just defied any explanation they had.
Okay, talk us through that movement, because that seems to be the most defining part of this whole event.
It really is. The radar guys there at National, they calculated the object's speed at certain points reaching up to 7,000 miles per hour.
7,000.
7,000. But maybe even more striking than the speed was the maneuverability. Some of these objects were seen just reversing direction instantly across the radar scope.
Okay, hang on. 7,000 miles per hour. We need to pause right there. Let's put that into perspective for 1952. What was the state of American tech then? What could we do?
Right. Well, the fastest operational jet the U.S. military had in '52, it was just starting to push the sound barrier, maybe 650, 700 miles per hour, tops.
So Mach 1, basically.
We were just entering the supersonic age. So to have objects pulling 7,000 miles per hour, that's over Mach 9.
Mach 9.
They were moving 10, maybe 12 times faster than anything the U.S. military had, or frankly even dreamed of having back then. The technological gap was just astronomical.
So, okay, the gap is clear. When Air Defense Command gets this frantic call, knowing they can't possibly intercept something pulling Mach 9, what was the point? What was the actual reason for scrambling those F-94 Starfire jets from Newcastle Air Force Base?
Well, the military always has to show some kind of response, right? Even if it's just symbolic sometimes. But they were definitely hoping for visual confirmation. The F-94s, they could at least do that. Ironically, those specific jets, they'd actually been secretly moved out of Bolling AFB in D.C. that very day because of runway repairs, so the response was actually slower than it might have been.
And here's where the story gets even stranger, leaning towards, well, almost behavioral aspects.
Right.
It suggests some kind of intelligent control, maybe, not just physics.
This is one of the most fascinating bits, the timing. Around 3 a.m., just shortly before those scrambled jets actually reached the airspace over Washington, all the objects just vanished, gone from the National Airport radar.
Completely.
Then, as soon as the jets, which were running low on fuel, had to leave the area to refuel, the objects reappeared.
That detail is.
Tiger.
Yeah, it's a narrative knockout.
Yeah.
It really suggests something deliberate.
It certainly convinced the supervisors on the ground. Barnes, the guy at National Airport, he later concluded, and this is a quote, that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly.
Wow.
The immediate feeling among the operators was that these were intelligently controlled craft, actively reacting to the military's moves.
So the radar guys are convinced. But what about visual confirmation? People actually looking up. We know Air Force Captain Harold May at Andrews Air Force Base. He initially saw a bright light changing colors, red, orange, green. But then he walked it back, didn't he? Said it was probably just a star distorted by the atmosphere.
Right, and that's key. It shows this internal conflict happening right away out in the field. You've got radar operators tracking solid, incredibly fast blips, while visual observers are struggling, trying to differentiate unknowns from, atmospheric tricks or stars or planets.
It sounds like a mess of conflicting data.
It was, but the event itself was just too public, too widespread to keep quiet.
No kidding. The sightings made immediate front-page news. Lead story stuff. Headlines like, "Saucers swarm over Capitol."
Exactly.
And I think maybe the best measure of the chaos, the confusion, is the fact that Edward J. Ruppelt, the guy actually in charge of Project Blue Book, the official Air Force investigation.
Yeah.
He was in Washington at the time. But he didn't even learn about arguably the biggest UFO sighting in U.S. history until Monday morning, July 21st.
Right.
When you read about it in the newspaper.
That just perfectly highlights the disorganization, doesn't it? The panic gripping the Capitol's command structure. The military system just wasn't set up to communicate about phenomena that didn't fit neatly into the box labeled known threat.
Okay, so the first weekend was a shock. But the government's inability to provide a quick, credible explanation really just set the stage for round two, didn't it?
It absolutely did. 1 week later, Saturday, July 26th. Starting a bit earlier this time, around 8:15 p.m. The objects, whatever they were, they came back for an encore performance, as some called it.
And this time, it wasn't just one airport's radar.
No, this time the corroboration was incredibly broad. It wasn't just National Airport. You had a stewardess and a captain on an incoming civilian flight reporting strange lights. You had officers at Andrews AFB seeing things, civilian pilots chiming in.
Yeah.
And crucially, the radar picture was undeniable. Unknown objects detected in every sector around D.C., sometimes moving slowly, other times displaying that same unbelievable speed, up to 7,000 miles per hour again. There was just no denying something unusual was out there.
So the Air Force had a whole week to prepare after the first incident. But it sounds like they were just as helpless this time around.
Pretty much. 2 more F-94s were scrambled. This time, the wingman, a Lieutenant William Patterson, he actually made visual contact.
He saw them.
He saw 4 white glows, as he described them. He chased them at maximum speed, but, trying to chase something potentially moving 10 times faster than your aircraft, it's basically futile.
Right.
And Patterson's radio transmission from that moment, it's become this critical piece of history. It just captures the sheer panic and the helplessness felt in the command center.
What did he say?
Albert Chopp, who was the press spokesman for Project Blue Book, he was actually present in the control room. He recalled Patterson calling urgently to ground control, saying something like, "I see them now and they're all around me. What should I do?"
And the response?
Chopp said, "And nobody answered because we didn't know what to tell him."
Wow. That's silence. That says everything, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
We hear the pilots panic, but what does that moment reveal about the institution? Was the military just not equipped, not trained for the unknown, only for known threats?
It really reveals a total lack of protocol for something like this. The whole system was geared towards intercepting, say, Soviet bombers, or maybe identifying weather balloons gone astray.
Standard stuff.
Exactly. It had zero operational procedure for objects that, defied known physics and seemed to show intelligent, non-hostile, but deeply, deeply unnerving behavior. The inability to respond effectively, that became the real threat in their eyes. Maybe more so than the objects themselves.
But even with all this happening, not everyone was jumping to the solid craft conclusion, right? There were still attempts to find more conventional explanations.
Oh, definitely. Internally, investigators were torn. You had Major Dewey Fournette, who was Project Blue Book's liaison at the Pentagon. He looked at the repeated radar data and was convinced. He believed they were dealing with solid metallic objects. He was pretty much a believer based purely on that radar evidence.
Okay.
But then a counter-investigation, sort of checking the work, showed that not all the radar blips were necessarily mysterious. There was one instance where a B-25 crew was vectored towards a radar target, and they discovered it was actually the Wilson Line steamboat doing its tourist trip down the Potomac to Mount Vernon.
A steamboat?
Yeah.
Seriously?
So radar anomalies, misidentifications, they were certainly possible, even probable in some of the cases. It wasn't all necessarily exotic.
But regardless of the mix of causes, the sheer scale and persistence of the sightings, especially the second weekend, this crisis reached the very highest levels of government, didn't it? President Truman got involved.
He did. President Truman was reportedly deeply concerned, alarmed, really. There are accounts that he personally called an aide to Ruppelt at Project Blue Book, demanding an immediate explanation. And apparently, he even listened in on that conversation on a separate phone line.
The President of the United States bypassing the chain of command to listen in on a call about flying objects.
Yeah. When it gets to that level, you know the crisis is absolute. The pressure for a cohesive, official explanation and fast must have been immense.
And this pressure cooker environment, this is what led to the official story, the one most people heard.
Precisely. That pressure forced the Air Force's hand. On July 29th, Major General John A. Samford, who was the Director of Intelligence for the Air Force, he held a big press conference, the largest since World War II, apparently.
And what was the explanation?
He delivered the public narrative. He basically supported the idea that most, if not all, of the radar returns were caused by a temperature inversion.
Okay, explain that. Temperature inversion causing radar ghosts.
Yeah, the theory is that specific layers of warm air over cool air in the atmosphere can bend radar signals. It can make them bounce off ground objects or even just atmospheric disturbances in a way that creates false, solid-looking targets on the scopes. And these false targets can appear to move erratically as the atmospheric conditions shift.
So that became the official story. A weather phenomenon.
That was the public story, yes. Yeah. It offered a plausible, non-threatening explanation, a big sigh of relief for the public and the press.
Was it true? Was the internal reality as neat and tidy as that public explanation?
Far from it. The internal reality was much murkier.
How so?
Well, for one, Ruppelt, the head of Blue Book, he'd actually suggested the temperature inversion theory to the president's aide before any real formal investigation had even been done. It sounds like it was a rush to find any plausible answer under pressure.
So find an explanation first, then see if the data fits.
Kind of seems that way. And critically, Lieutenant Holcomb at the National Weather Station, the actual weather expert who should have been able to confirm this, he apparently felt that the inversion present during the sightings was, quote, not nearly strong enough to explain the good and solid returns that the radar operators were seeing.
So the weather expert didn't back it up strongly?
Not strongly enough for those very specific, solid, fast-moving radar returns. In the end, the scientists in the field couldn't definitively confirm the official answer covered everything. And Project Blue Book itself, in its final analysis, actually listed the most dramatic Washington, D.C. sightings from those weekends as unknown.
Unknown, not temperature inversion.
Officially listed as unknown.
Okay, this reveals a really crucial turning point then. It seems the government's biggest worry wasn't actually what these objects were or where they came from. It was something else, tied to the Cold War.
That's absolutely the crux of the high-level decision-making that followed. For the CIA, for the top Air Force brass, the primary concern wasn't aliens landing on the White House lawn. It was the potential for mass hysteria among the American public. And crucially, how an enemy, namely the Soviets, could exploit that panic for psychological warfare.
Is there direct evidence for that being their main concern?
Oh, yes. There's a CIA memo from September 1952, just a couple months later. It's shockingly clear. It directly states that the real danger in the public concern with the phenomena lies the potential for the touching off of mass hysteria and panic. That was the threat they focused on.
The panic itself was the weapon.
Exactly. They realized that this phenomenon, even if it turned out to be entirely misidentifications and natural causes, could be weaponized by an adversary. The fear, the confusion, the undermining of public trust in the government and military, that was the vulnerability.
And it went even further than just worrying about it, didn't it?
It did. The CIA director at the time, Walter Bedell Smith, he actually suggested they should actively study how this whole UFO craze could potentially be used by the U.S., offensively or defensively. He wrote, and this is another quote, "I suggest that we discuss the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these phenomena for psychological warfare purposes."
Wow. So the core threat wasn't the flying saucer itself, but the potential for societal breakdown, for panic, and how the Soviets might exploit that during a very tense Cold War period.
It was a very pragmatic, if perhaps cynical, Cold War calculation. And that fear, the fear of mass hysteria and its exploitation, led directly to a formal shift in policy regarding UFOs.
And this policy shift was solidified pretty quickly, right? January 1953 with the Robertson panel.
That's right. The CIA convened a panel of prominent scientists chaired by Dr. H.P. Robertson. They reviewed the best evidence Blue Book had, including footage, case files, the works.
And what did this panel of experts conclude?
Their recommendations essentially define the U.S. government's official and unofficial approach to UFOs for decades to come. The panel basically concluded that managing public perception was far more critical than actually solving the mystery of the sightings themselves.
So control the narrative, not investigate the phenomenon.
That was the recommendation. They specifically advised that the Air Force should actively debunk sightings. They wanted to implement educational programs using psychologists, astronomers, maybe even Disney cartoons to explain away sightings and reduce public interest. The goal was, and again, this is from their report, to strip the unidentified flying objects of the special status they have been given and the aura of mystery they have unfortunately acquired.
In other words, shut down the discussion, make it seem boring, ridiculous. Strip away the fascination and just bring public interest down to zero.
Precisely. The solution they landed on was information control, using the entire Cold War national security apparatus not necessarily to investigate the phenomenon openly, but primarily to dismiss it, debunk it, and manage public perception.
It's really incredible when you trace it back. It starts with these solid, unexplainable 7,000-mile-per-hour blips on radar over the nation's capital. It causes presidential alarm. And the ultimate result is an official government policy designed to actively encourage public dismissal and, essentially, covert debunking.
The Washington Flap, those 2 weekends in 1952, they remain such a defining moment because they offer the clearest possible snapshot of the government's priority structure back then. When faced with a profound unknown, the decision was made that managing public perception and national security concerns took precedence over transparently investigating the phenomenon itself. It really set the playbook for decades.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty serious question to think about, doesn't it? The ultimate recommendation, coming from the highest levels of the U.S. government, was effectively to suppress public interest, to avoid panic, and for national security reasons. So what makes you wonder? What responsibility does the government have? Is it to rigorously investigate and potentially reveal knowledge about an extraordinary phenomenon, whatever the consequences? Or is its primary duty to protect the public from the potential societal panic and disruption that such a revelation might cause? Where does that balance lie?